Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Tuesday, May 19th, 2026. I'm Carleen Johnson, the Center Square's state government reporter. And in today's episode, it has been 1 week since Let's Go Washington launched their signature drive. They are hoping to repeal the newly passed income tax. So we'll get an update on where things stand there. And the Building Industry Association of Washington, BIAW, has partnered with Let's Go Washington on that signature drive. I had a conversation this morning with Executive Vice President of BIAW, Greg Lane, to find out why they think this is so important to their members to, partner with LGW to hopefully get this thing on the ballot this November and give voters a chance to weigh in. Meantime, the Economic Opportunity Institute, one of the groups behind the income tax, tells me they're not too worried about whether or not it's constitutional. One of their members is going to share some insight on that. And then the state Department of Ecology recently said we're going to be in for another drought emergency this summer. Could be water restrictions coming for junior water rights holders in central and eastern Washington. Of course, that's a huge concern for our agricultural community friends in that part of the state. Cliff Mass, UW atmospheric sciences professor, has written a couple of prior blogs pushing back and kind of refuting all of ecology's, statements as to say why we're going to have a drought emergency. He wrote another blog on Monday. I found it fascinating. Had a conversation with him and also a woman from the state's climate office. They come from diametrically opposite opinions on whether or not we've got a drought emergency. So that's coming up in today's episode of Washington in Focus. So a week after Let's Go Washington launched an initiative campaign aimed at repealing the newly passed income tax, the organization tells me today they have never had a response. This many people reaching out to them in this short period of time, just a week since they launched, saying, we want to be a part. How do I get petitions? How can I help with this effort? It's been an overwhelming response. I didn't get any specific numbers. They haven't released those yet. Simply to say they've had an overwhelming response, nothing like they've ever seen before. This is IP 26 645. That's the initiative number. The IP stands for Initiative to the People, 26 because the year is 2026 645. So their goal is to get at least 309,000 valid voter signatures in the next 44 days. So they had 51 days from launch date. We're a week in, so 44 days remaining. But really their goal is to get a lot more than that. They want to get something close to 400,000 or so to account for duplicate voter signatures or people that are not registered voters and can't sign that petition. Those folks would get thrown out, or those signatures would get thrown out by the Secretary of State's office. So the goal is to get way more than you need to account for everything that gets invalidated. The Building Industry Association of Washington is partnering with Let's Go Washington, really helping them with the signature gathering. And I had a conversation this morning with BIAW's Executive Vice President, Greg Lane. And he explained to me why they are so motivated to be a part of this. He says it's not just about their Building Industry Association members, who are, many of them, impacted in their business capacity, but he says he has concerns for this eventually affecting all Washingtonians.
This is a position our members have had since, since this whole issue came up, and it's for a number of different reasons. The first one is we know that it's an economic development killer. People who drive this economy, who create jobs in this economy, are going to be moving from our state, and so it's just bad overall for economic development and job growth here in the state of Washington. So that's one big reason. We do have a number of members who it will apply to. It's not a large percentage of our membership, but there are some who will fall into it because of the way that it's structured with the pass through LLCs and the way businesses are structured. And the way that construction works is, projects often take multiple years to complete. And so for a builder who's, in an LLC, for example, and they're doing a project for 3 years, they'll lose money. They won't make any money for 3 years. And then suddenly, they'll sell the project at the end when it's all done, and that's where they'll make their money. So for, a couple years, they're making their money over a 3-year period. It, averages out, it's going to be, say 500 to $700,000 a year, maybe something like that. But they're going to get it all at once at the third year, and then they're going to get taxed on it because it comes in 1 year. And so they may not pay the tax every single year, but because of the way construction works and the way that the compensation in construction works, they're going to end up having to pay this tax. But most important is that we know that this is only the beginning. And, once they get the income tax, if the initiative doesn't pass and they're able to get it through the courts and the courts say, give it its blessing, and it gets implemented, we know that that number, that $1 million figure is going to come down, and it's going to come down, and it's going to hit more and more people, more and more small business people over time once they get that nose under the tent. And so that's the biggest reason why we're in opposition to it, is because we know that ultimately more and more Washington families and Washington employers are going to have to pay this tax over time. And so those are the reasons why we've opposed it from the beginning. And this isn't new to us, and we're strongly supportive of the initiative. We will be actively working with Let's Go Washington to collect signatures and get it qualified for November.
Meantime, the Economic Opportunity Institute, in support of the income tax, told me last month that they support this as part of the solution toward correcting Washington's regressive tax code. So I asked EOI's Policy and Research Associate Annie Kuklik, do you have any concerns about whether or not this tax is constitutional? Of course, we have a legal challenge that was filed last month in Klickitat County Superior Court that is moving ahead. At the same time, we have now this initiative drive that hopes to be on the ballot this year.
That's going to be ultimately up to the courts to decide. It's not our role to determine that. You can look at the history of Washington and how it's been interpreted. You can look at other states and how property is interpreted, because ultimately it comes down to the definition of how you define property and income, and if income is defined as property. So it will be up to the courts to decide that. We are anticipating a ballot fight, right? People will have a say in determining whether they want this to stay or not. We don't know if that's going to come this year in 2026 or if it'll come in 2027 next year, but we're anticipating that.
And again, Greg Lane at BIAW, he said that they're hearing from their members and just his circle of influence that people are pretty upset about the way this income tax was passed during the 2026 legislative session. He described it as overwhelming frustration about how lawmakers pushed this through, attaching that necessity clause to make it referendum proof.
The overall negativity that I've heard toward the income tax, it's very similar to the gas ban in that sense, in that the public is really in opposition to this. And so I don't think we're going to see as many problems, and we're going to see a lot of just excitement and support coming out to sign the initiative and get it qualified for the ballot. And I would compare it very much to the reaction we had to the natural gas ban when we were out collecting signatures. No, we really didn't come up with a whole lot of that type of opposition that Brian faced with the other two initiatives. And I think the income tax initiative would be very similar to that in terms of public reaction. They really, I think, broke the public trust on this issue. And a lot of the reaction isn't, I mean, a lot of it, of course, is in response to just having an income tax, but the way they went about it, and really kind of thumbing their nose at the public, and the public opposition for an income tax also, I think, really fires people up, and it's going to be seen in the response to signing the initiative.
So from today, this May 19th, they have just 44 days remaining to gather those signatures. But again, Let's Go Washington told me today they've never had a response like this for any of their initiative campaigns in the past. So we'll see how this all shakes out in the coming days. And now to Washington's potential drought emergency. Do we have one? The State Department of Ecology says they are forecasting the potential for a drought emergency based on low snowpack, while UW professor of atmospheric sciences Cliff Mass is basically calling that a bunch of bunk. He put up a new blog post on Monday, the 18th, basically, saying it's simply and demonstrably false. Um, he describes it this way. He says, like a vampire, the drought claims cannot be killed so easily. So I want to share part of my conversation this morning with Cliff Mass, again, atmospheric sciences professor at the University of Washington.
But there's never been a situation where the reservoirs were completely full and there was a problem for agriculture in the Yakima Valley. If the reservoirs are full, and they are full, and they're going to remain full for a little while, there's never been, if you look historically, there's never been a problem. And the snowpack is for earlier in the summer and for filling the reservoirs, but the reservoirs are full. And so the facts are so damn clear. I mean, the irrigation in eastern Washington is from two main sources. One is the Columbia and one is the Yakima. Okay. The largest area is the Columbia. Well, everybody knows admits the Columbia is fine. Okay. All the flow predictions, everything is fine for the Columbia. And that's because the snowpack and precipitation was fine in the drainage area in British Columbia and in Canada, right? So Columbia is fine. That means plenty of water for irrigation for most of the irrigation in eastern Washington, and plenty of water for power. Okay, plenty for water for fish in the Columbia. Okay, that's not a problem. No problem, right? So, and the reservoirs on the west side are all full. Okay, so they can't do that. So what they're fixated on is the Yakima, right? That's why the Yakima is the one they're talking about, right? And so, but the trouble for them, or their argument, is that the reservoirs are absolutely topped off for the Yakima. And the truth is that the snowpack, the melt of the snowpack provides water in May and the first part of June. But during the middle end of summer, where they really need the water, it's the reservoirs.
Right.
I mean, and they can't argue around this. They really can't. And so there will be no problem because those reservoirs are full. It's as simple as that.
Now, at the conclusion of Mass's blog post from Monday, he wrote this. He said, in summary, the drought emergency declaration by Washington State should be dropped immediately. Washington State residents deserve accurate information. Washington agriculture should not be undermined by ill-advised, unscientific declarations. Now, on the flip side of this, definitely the opposite completely of where Cliff Mass comes down on the drought emergency, is Karen Bambacco. She is the deputy state climatologist at the UW. And I spoke with her as well this morning. And she says, yes, in fact, the reservoirs, as Mass, you just heard him say there, the reservoirs are full and things look pretty good right now. But she explained to me that the way it works is they basically have to put out a warning about the potential for a drought emergency.
Washington State has a drought definition written into state law. And so part of that definition is whether conditions are anticipated to become less than 75% of normal for water supply. I can rephrase that. I think what I'm trying to say is that the drought definition that's written into state law allows for the drought to be declared before conditions are really being felt, right? So part of it is to prepare for conditions that might be coming later in the spring and summer, and that's exactly what the state has done. So I agree with him in the sense that current conditions right now at this very moment look good. We're under overcast skies. We've had a little bit of a rainy period. Our reservoirs are full. But what we're looking at is how we expect things to get worse over the spring and summer. So, I mean, we know for sure that the reduced water supply in and of itself is an issue. So, right now, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation is estimating that the total water supply available for May through September is only 52% of a normal allotment for the junior water users. So, that in and of itself is an impact in my view. The senior water users, absolutely. So far, things are looking fine for them with 100% of their water supply. But I actually was just chatting with some folks from the Rosa Irrigation District earlier this week, and they're still expecting to turn off irrigation water for potentially about 10 days or so starting this week. And they're expecting that their irrigation season will end about 3 weeks early. So there will very much be impacts for junior water users. Last year, it actually impacted senior water users. So for the first time in I guess since ecology has been curtailing water, so they actually curtailed senior water users in October, which was an unprecedented decision at that time because those reservoirs were so low by the end of last year's water season. So there is evidence that even senior water users can be impacted.
And again, Mass says there has been no scenario in state history where we have full reservoirs this time of year, and then we end up with, a drought situation and devastating impacts on the egg community. So, as far as he is concerned, this is being pushed by the Department of Ecology and others, basically as part of the climate crisis agenda. Now, related to this, scientists today came out and said they are scaling back their worst case scenario for how hot the world might get from climate change. So, what changes are scientists making? This is from the New York Times today. I want to put up part of what they listed. It said researchers said a worst case climate scenario that's been used in science and policy making for more than a decade had, quote, become implausible and would be revised downward. That hothouse scenario assumed the highest realistic future greenhouse gas emissions. It predicted that by the end of the century, global average temperatures could rise by 5 degrees Celsius or 9 degrees Fahrenheit over pre industrial levels. Now, the article went on to say that though they're revising, how hot it's going to get quite a bit down from what they were saying a decade ago, the sky is falling. It's not that their predictions were so wrong, they say, but that investments made in renewable energies are paying off. So you can make up your own mind about that. Remember here in the state of Washington, we've been waiting for the Department of Ecology to give us updated emissions, basically success for our climate goals. And those numbers are far behind, really not seeing any current data here in the state of Washington for the investments that we're making, like with the CCA and the reason why your gas prices are in part so high. So again, you take that to mean what you take that to mean, and weigh that. I encourage you to check out our articles at the Center Square Washington page for both of these articles today. And that concludes today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily for this Tuesday, May 19th. Thanks for watching, and we hope you'll join us again tomorrow.